Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/Markets Plus for more episodes.
Welcome back to the BMO Markets Plus podcast. I'm Laurence Mussio, co-founder and chair of the Long Run Institute, special advisor to the Chief Executive Officer of BMO Financial Group, and a fellow of the Royal Historical Society of the UK. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the technical side of the AI conversation, the algorithms, the compute power, all the engineering marvels. But if you've studied any major business transformation, you know that's just the opening act. The real story, the one that determines winners and losers, is about culture and leadership, how organizations actually adapt. Technology lights the match, but culture determines whether you get a bonfire or a dumpster fire. And that's why I'm particularly excited about today's guest. Dr. Andrew McAfee is Principal Research Scientist at MIT and co-founder of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. For the past 20 years and more, he's been one of our clearest voices on how digital technologies actually transform business. His books, Race Against the Machine, The Second Machine Age, More from Less, have shaped how leaders worldwide think about technological change. And his newest book, The Geek Way, we'll talk about today, essentially cracks the code on what makes today's most innovative companies tick. He boils it down to 4 essential behaviors: science, ownership, speed, and openness. And he's been named to one of the top 50 thinkers in the universe, I think, in the world. And his ideas have influenced everyone from Silicon Valley startups to Fortune 500 boardrooms. I personally have been following his work for about 15 years, which makes this conversation particularly meaningful for me. So today we're going to explore how the principles in the Geek Way aren't just helpful for understanding AI, they're essentially the operating manual for any business leader trying to navigate what comes next. So a very warm welcome, Andy. And I hope you're comfortable there. You've got your water, because we're going to get into some pretty intense technological, cultural conversation.
I'm ready. I have hydration. I feel pretty well rested. Let's go.
All right. Let's start with the basics. Now, your book identifies 4 norms, and I mentioned them: science, ownership, speed, and openness as the cultural DNA of innovative companies. Now, we've been through management revolutions, haven't we? Six Sigma, you name it. What makes the Geek Way different, and why are these particular norms so critical right now?
I never thought I would write a book that could be categorized as an organizational culture book. I never, ever aspired to that. I found most conversations about organizational culture really lacking in calories and really high in hubris. And I never, ever thought that I would do it. So the reason this came about was I started to see a phenomenon that I couldn't explain. And the phenomenon that's come out of Silicon Valley that we're all aware of is it's the epicenter of the global digital technology gold rush, right? A crazy percentage of the world's most valuable technology companies are headquartered in a tiny patch of real estate in Northern California with an outpost up in the state of Washington. And it's bizarre how dominant those 2 patches of real estate are in the global technology landscape. But we kind of know that story, right? We know about Google, we know about NVIDIA, we know about Apple. The story that I think we underappreciate and that caused me to write The Geek Way was the fact that companies that are coming out of that same really small patch of real estate are now not confined to classic digital high-tech industries. They're now spreading out throughout the economy, and they're making the incumbents look bad at their own game. So I'll give you a couple examples, and these are companies that you know about, but it's easy to lose sight of how remarkable their success is. Netflix was founded in 1997 as a DVD by mail company to save us the trip to Blockbuster, which was one of the most soul-sucking experiences. A lot of people listening to this are going to be too young to remember, but yeah, in the 80s and 90s, it was a really soul-sucking way to watch a video in the evening. So these at the time, I think there were 2 co-founders of Netflix. And the founding idea of the company was that a DVD could be mailed around in a standard American first-class postage envelope, no extra postage necessary. And the story goes that they mailed a DVD to one of their houses, and it showed up, and it wasn't scratched, and they put it in the DVD player, and it worked. And they said, Eureka, there's a business idea here. We're going to combine this thing called the web, which was new, with the ability to mail a DVD around in an envelope. And that's where Netflix came from. They tried to sell themselves to Blockbuster at one point for $50 million, back when that was a decent amount of money. And Blockbuster said, why on earth would we do this? This is a silly little thing. We know that's not a silly little thing. Reed Hastings, one of the co-founders and the CEO of Netflix, realized pretty early on that they were not just going to be mailing DVDs around, that we were going to be streaming entertainment to the home. And at the time he started talking about that, it was crazy talk. But the real crazy talk started a few years later when in 2010, Netflix announced its ambitions to develop its own programming, to become a Hollywood studio. And I really have difficulty conveying how unimpressed Hollywood was by that, how little of a threat they found that. Hollywood is, let's do a quick industrial analysis of Hollywood. Hollywood is a capital-intensive, knowledge-intensive, oligopolistic, heavily network-based industry headquartered in Southern California, been going strong for 100 years, the world's entertainment headquarters, and periodically outsiders had tried to come in and join Hollywood, produce entertainment for the world, and they were miserable failures over and over again. So along come mailing DVDs around, and they announced their ambitions to produce entertainment. In 15 years, it's been 15 years, to become the world's dominant provider of filmed entertainment. I rely a lot on market valuations, market capitalizations, to tell me how to think about a company. I love Warren Buffett's quote that in the short run, the market is a voting machine, and in the long run, it's a weighing machine. This is the collective judgment of the world's investors about the future prospects of a company. What does the future look like? Right now, the global investment community thinks that Netflix, DVD by mail in 1997, is worth $500 billion, say it with me, trillion dollars. I compared that to Time Warner, which is now called Warner Brothers Discovery. Warner Brothers Discovery is worth about 1/17 of that these days. They're worth something probably less than $30 billion right now. Disney, the iconic American entertainment company, it has all the entertainment franchises. It has theme parks. It has cruise ships. It's this globally recognized, very, very important company, is worth well less than half of what Netflix is worth. This is unheard of. This is unprecedented. I've gone back and tried to look. I can't find examples of complete outsiders showing up in a very, very stable industry and turning it on its head that quickly. I'll give you an even quicker story. SpaceX was founded in 2002 by a fairly idiosyncratic person who believed that humanity needed to become an interplanetary species. That was the founding idea of SpaceX. And to do that, because we can't fly that far, you need a rocket. SpaceX's initial attempt to acquire a rocket was to go to the former Soviet Union and try to buy an old Russian rocket. Those negotiations didn't go very well. So Elon Musk and his lieutenants came back to the United States and they said, I guess we got to build a rocket. Okay, 2002, here comes a few space cowboys. Musk was a complete outsider to the space industry. His career had been done at PayPal. They think they got to build a rocket. And the global aerospace industry didn't even think that was worth commenting on. Again, this is a very capital-intensive, knowledge-intensive, oligopolistic industry with a very cozy relationship with the small number of buyers out there for payload services. All the defense contractors, all the aerospace companies in America have very deep relationships with NASA. This is not the industry that a bunch of 24-year-olds are supposed to break into. This structurally just doesn't look right. In addition, in 2002, everybody in the global space industry knew that if you could reuse rockets, your costs would go down. This is not news to anybody. SpaceX was founded in 2002. In 2016, this is not even 15 years later, in 2016, SpaceX reflew the first commercially viable orbital rocket. And by now they've done, I think, more than 450 relaunches of commercially viable orbital rockets. The rest of the global space industry combined has done zero as of this point. I could give you other examples, but I think you get the idea. So the phenomenon that I got interested in was these companies with very strong Silicon Valley roots and a hell of a lot of Silicon Valley DNA going into the rest of the economy and beating the incumbents on their own turf at their own game handily over and over again. And I tried to understand what was allowing these companies to do that. And the answer is they are organized and run differently. They have different leadership and management philosophies. They have different norms, as you alluded to. My conclusion is nothing less. This is a strong conclusion, but I firmly believe it. These geeks have upgraded the thing that we call the company. They have upgraded this thing that we call the corporation. And the upgrade is better, and it's going to win out.
It's really fascinating. There's so much to unpack there, Andy. It seems to me that these are kind of powerful stories of technology, but they're not. This is not a technology story. It is a culture and organizational story, right? Primarily, because you're saying they're rewriting the DNA code for the corporation.
Yeah, I think it's completely wrong to call Netflix a tech company. Netflix is no more a tech company than HBO is, than Disney is. I'm pretty sure that HBO and Disney have more programmers, more software engineers working for them than Netflix does. They probably have a bigger data science team than Netflix does. Everyone who makes entertainment has a whole lot of technology going on. The phenomenon that I'm fascinated by is who can reliably win with technology, who can reliably adopt the cool new stuff, harness it, put it to use, create value with it, and go mop the floor with the competition.
Right. And this kind of follows a kind of an historical pattern in some ways, between the delta between, say, invention and innovation and diffusion, right? And so we see that pattern. And I wonder if this is a fundamental failure to understand pattern recognition, or even like Schumpeterian kind of gales of creative destruction, because we know this from studying technological transformation. So it's not anything particularly new, but people seem to forget the lessons, or they forget the patterns.
So let me take the incumbent side on this one, because you're bringing up a really fundamental topic. The incumbents in Hollywood, after a century of watching upstarts try to come in and take their market share, disrupt entertainment, the incumbents in Hollywood in the early 21st century could be forgiven for being complacent. They had seen plenty of pretenders show up and get sent packing. I think the same thing is true for the space industry. It's pretty clearly true for the auto industry, where, there was DeLorean and there were these other attempts to make car companies, and they turned into nothing. So by the early years of the 21st century, again, we had a set of large global industries populated by this pretty stable population of incumbents. And I wrote a Substack post. They remind me of teams in a beer hockey league, just kind of getting together every Sunday night and swapping the puck around, and sometimes one win and sometimes the other wins. But it's a pretty stable group, right? And then all of a sudden, a bunch of, 19-year-olds show up who can really skate and start making all these beer league hockey teams look bad. And I think that's what's going on. But the technology that I got fascinated by, I'm fascinated by artificial intelligence, but the technology that I got fundamentally fascinated by was the company. The company is a technology. I don't want to sound super meta about this, but by any definition, this thing that we invented called the company, this is a technology for letting us accomplish our goals. I think that technology has received an upgrade, which is why we're seeing this almost simultaneous disruption in lots of different historically stable industries around the world. I don't think that disruption's over. Now, I do think there are some parts of the economy that are going to be resistant to this, this incursion by the geeks. The image I have is of Alexander the Great's army running through the known world in, I forget exactly when he did it, but making successive empires just look bad, literally on their own turf, right? I do think there are some places that are going to be able to resist for a while, mainly because I think there are some industries and some companies where the thicket of regulation and required permission is dense enough that the geeks are staying away from it. I was talking to the CEO of a global insurance company a while back, and he drove the point home to me. He said, look, Andy, the number of permissions that my company has received to do business all over the world where we do business is a very, very long list. And I am not worried about a team of really bright 24-year-olds with a bunch of AI expertise disrupting me because they got to get all those permissions. But what he said was interesting. He said, what I want to do is use some of these same ideas to change my company so that I can then go take customers and market share and profitability away from the other incumbents in my industry. So in some places, that's going to be the process by which the geek energy spreads and all of us consumers benefit. In other places, I do think it's going to be just good old-fashioned venture-backed startup disruption, which we've already seen a lot of.
And that's a really It's a really fundamental point because in this space in particular, I think there are different games for different players, right? So people might say, well, we're not a geek way company. We're not a Silicon Valley startup, almost as a rationalization for lack of action.
Totally.
And so to say, well, we'll survive. We've survived all these other kind of general purpose technology transformations, if they can put it that way.
And some of those folk are right. But the number of management teams, leadership teams who are complacent is greater than the number of leadership teams who should be complacent. Probably a lot greater.
Exactly. So we'll get back to this question about what companies can do. It seems to me that big companies or incumbents, highly regulated incumbents, might invest more in training and infrastructure and also start to at least attempt to flatten these hierarchies. But they're very tenacious hierarchies, though.
So the excuse, we can't do that because of the regulators, is a very common excuse. It is, in some cases, I think it's sincere, and it's also convenient. And in a lot of cases, if you dove in on it really hard, I think you might come to a different conclusion. One of the really interesting things that Elon, I think, has brought to the world of management thinking and management studies is, if you read the Walter Isaacson biography of him, if you read a really good book called Re-Entry about SpaceX learning to build reusable rockets, one of the things you realize is Elon caught on to that. And he was absolutely tenacious about saying, show me. You have to show me the exact thing that's keeping you from making the change that the rest of this table thinks is a good idea. And I want a person's name associated with that. I want to know who to talk to when we want to make this change. And if you can't tell me that, get out of the way. It's very powerful because when we hear, we can't do that because regulators won't let us. 95% of us are like, okay, we tried, and walk away. And the geeks now are saying, no, let's double click on that.
A lot of your book, your splendid book, The Geek Way, which I heartily recommend to everybody, they go out and purchase it immediately, is this idea. You get into social psychology and incentives, okay? But if you drill down, you go to the level of the division or the unit or the individual, and you say, there are a lot of mismatched incentives to perpetuate these hierarchies or lack of productivity and so forth. Right?
Yeah.
So
one of the really cool things I learned when I was researching The Geek Way was that at the same time that a bunch of technology geeks were upgrading the company and going into these different industries and wiping the floor with the incumbents like we've been talking about, something else was also happening. There was another group of scientific geeks who was putting together a new discipline called cultural evolution. And like you point out, we humans are weird. There's nothing else like it on the planet. We can evolve our cultures with such astonishing speed. And for me, that's the eureka, that cultural evolution is the way to think about our amazing human superpower. And what I think the geeks have figured out is how to speed up the pace of cultural evolution inside this thing called the company in ways that are productive, that make the incumbents look bad, and then increase the value of the firm. So like you say, cultural evolution is the discipline that I grounded the book in, and I think it's a pretty firm grounding.
Yes, indeed. Now, why don't we attempt to bring this home a little bit? Our audience includes CEOs, entrepreneurs, business owners, also people maybe who might be concerned for their jobs because of a lot of the hype around AI. Will AI take my job? That might not be the right question, but it's not usually how it works in previous technological transformations. But if you could give companies or people listening out there today who are part of organizations that we've described either on one side or the other today, one key principle from the Geek Way to guide them through the AI transformation, what would it be?
Among the different slogans that I toss out, if I could only pick one, it would be plan a little and iterate a lot. Because one of the sharpest contrasts that I noticed between geeks and legacy companies and incumbents is their approach to managing big, complicated projects. And at the risk of oversimplification, what the incumbents do is sit around and plan and analyze and get on the whiteboard and have big sheets, and they try to map out the future and all possible contingencies before they start doing anything. And the geeks think that's a fool's errand, and I'm with them. You've heard about minimum viable product as a thing that's come out of Silicon Valley. I also think there's an idea of a minimum viable plan. In other words, we got to get our heads together and think about where we want to focus our efforts, where we want to focus our investment with AI. Great, let's figure that out. And then the way you learn is by doing things and getting things out there, getting feedback, getting valid feedback on them as rapidly as possible, incorporating that feedback and getting the next version of that thing out there in the world. It's iteration with feedback at the fastest possible cadence, as opposed to a lot of planning. Laurence, you've heard of this difference between waterfall and agile methods for managing a project. Waterfall is the classic old-fashioned, linear, sequential, very planning-heavy approach. Agile is what the geeks do. It's this iterative, fast cadence thing. I love this quote from Clay Shirky, who said that waterfall is an agreement on the part of everyone involved not to learn anything during the project. That's just beautiful. Great. Once you think about it that way, you run away from that as quickly as possible. Agile it might be a little bit more chaotic. It might have more false starts, but it has a higher rate of learning than anything else. So my slogan is your ratio of planning to doing is probably just about backward. And you need to plan a little and iterate a lot.
So success comes from building kind of that adaptive capacity and not perfect plans.
Well, if you could build perfect plans, that might be worth doing, but you can't. The future is a crazy unknown place. And one of the most pervasive human biases, probably the most pervasive, is overconfidence. We're just chronically overconfident. The only thing is to use reality as a check on your overconfidence. And to me, that's what the geek way does. That's what this iteration-heavy approach does. It reduces the amount of time that you can spend kidding yourself.
Well, exactly. And I come from a different kind of angle of vision on these things in terms of institutional memory and so forth. If you have that adaptive capacity and then you're constantly reiterating, you're constantly learning, organizations are not that great at actually retaining that knowledge, right?
I think the way that you learn how to launch rockets, to use your term of learning, is to launch a lot of rockets. That's kind of my glib answer to your fairly deep question, right? How do you learn how to make filmed entertainment? You make a lot of successful filmed entertainment, right? You build up good reps that way. Again, with feedback, with reflection, with after-action reviews.
Andy, this has been exactly the conversation business leaders need right now, in my opinion. The Geek Way isn't just another management book. It isn't just another scholarly book, because that's what it is too, given your very deep research pedigree. It's essentially a survival guide for the transformation we're all living through. So thanks very much for enlightening us and for having this conversation.
Laurence, thanks. I had a blast.
This has been the BMO Markets Plus podcast. I'm Laurence Mussio, and until next time, remember that in business as an evolution, survival doesn't go to the strongest or even the smartest. It goes to the most responsive to change, with the wisdom to know when and how to adapt. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.